A man and machine-s mature industries stagnate. Information technology has advanced so rapidly that it has now become synonymous with technology itself. Today, more than 1.5 billion people enjoy instant access to the world's knowledge using pocket-sized devices. Every one of today's smartphones has thousands of times more processing power than the computers that guided astronauts to the moon. And if Moore's law continues apace, tomorrow's computers will be even more powerful. Computers already have enough power to outperform people in activities we used to think of as distinctively human. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov. Jeopardy's best ever contestant, Ken Jennings, succumbed to IBM's Watson in 2011. And Google's self-driving cars are already on California roads today. Dale Earnhardt Jr. needn't feel threatened by them, but The Guardian worries, on behalf of the millions of chauffeurs and cabbies in the world, that self-driving cars could drive the next wave of unemployment. Everyone expects computers to do more in the future, so much more that some wonder, 30 years from now, will there be anything left for people to do? Software is eating the world, venture capitalist Marc Andreessen has announced with a tone of inevitability. VC Andy Kessler sounds almost gleeful when he explains that the best way to create productivity is to get rid of people. Forbes captured a more anxious attitude when it asked readers, "Will a machine replace you?" Futurists can seem like they hope the answer is yes. Luddites are so worried about being replaced that they would rather we stop building new technology altogether. Neither side questions the premise that better computers will necessarily replace human workers. But that premise is wrong. Computers are complements for humans, not substitutes. The most valuable businesses of coming decades will be built by entrepreneurs who seek to empower people rather than try to make them obsolete. Substitution vs. complementarity. 15 years ago, American workers were worried about competition from cheaper Mexican substitutes. And that made sense, because humans really can substitute for each other. Today people think they can hear Ross Perot's giant sucking sound once more, but they trace it back to server farms somewhere in Texas instead of cut-rate factories in Tijuana. Americans fear technology in the near future because they see it as a replay of the globalization of the near past. But the situations are very different. People compete for jobs and for resources, computers compete for neither. Globalization means substitution. When Parrott warned about foreign competition, both George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton preached the gospel of free trade. Since every person has a relative strength at some particular job, in theory the economy maximizes wealth when people specialize according to their advantages and then trade with each other. In practice, it's not unambiguously clear how well free trade has worked, for many workers at least. Gains from trade are greatest when there's a big discrepancy in comparative advantage, but the global supply of workers willing to do repetitive tasks for an extremely small wage is extremely large. People don't just compete to supply labor, they also demand the same resources. While American consumers have benefited from access to cheap toys and textiles from China, they've had to pay higher prices for the gasoline newly desired by millions of Chinese motorists. Whether people eat shark NS in Shanghai or SH tacos in San Diego, they all need food and they all need shelter. And desire doesn't stop at subsistence. People will demand ever more as globalization continues. Now that millions of Chinese peasants can now enjoy a secure supply of basic calories, they want more of them to come from pork instead of just grain. The convergence of desire is even more obvious at the top. All oligarchs have the same taste in crystal, from Petersburg to Pyongyang. Technology means complementarity. Now think about the prospect of competition from computers instead of competition from human workers. On the supply side, computers are far more different from people than any two people are different from each other. Men and machines are good at fundamentally different things. People have intentionality. We form plans and make decisions in complicated situations. We are less good at making sense of enormous amounts of data. Computers are exactly the opposite. They excel at efficient data processing, but they struggle to make basic judgments that would be simple for any human. To understand the scale of this variance, consider another of Google's computer for human substitution projects. In 2012, one of their supercomputers made headlines when, after scanning 10 million thumbnails of YouTube videos, it learned to identify a cat with 75% accuracy. That seems impressive until you remember that an average 4-year-old can do it flawlessly. When a cheap laptop beats the smartest mathematicians at some tasks, but even a supercomputer with 16,000 CPUs can't beat a child at others, you can tell that humans and computers are not just more or less powerful than each other, they're categorically different. The stark differences between man and machine mean that gains from working with computers are much higher than gains from trade with other people. We don't trade with computers any more than we trade with livestock or lamps. And that's the point, computers are tools, not rivals. The differences are even deeper on the demand side. Unlike people in industrializing countries, computers don't yearn for more luxurious foods or beachfront villas in Cap Ferrat. All they require is a nominal amount of electricity, which they're not even smart enough to want. When we design new computer technology to help solve problems, we get all the efficiency gains of a hyper-specialized trading partner without having to compete with it for resources. Properly understood, technology is the one way for us to escape competition in a globalizing world. As computers become more and more powerful, they won't be substitutes for humans, they'll be complements. Complementary businesses. Complementarity between computers and humans isn't just a macro-scale fact. It's also the path to building a great business. I came to understand this from my experience at PayPal. In mid-2000, we had survived the dot-com crash and we were growing fast, but we faced one huge problem: we were losing upwards of $10 million to credit card fraud every month. Since we were processing hundreds or even thousands of transactions per minute, we couldn't possibly review each one. No human quality control team could work that fast. So we did what any group of engineers would do: we tried to automate a solution. First, Max Levchin assembled an elite team of mathematicians to study the fraudulent transfers in detail. Then we took what we learned and wrote software to automatically identify and cancel bogus transactions in real time. But it quickly became clear that this approach wouldn't work either. After an hour or two, the thieves would catch on and change their tactics. We were dealing with an adaptive enemy, and our software couldn't adapt in response. The fraudsters' adaptive evasions fooled our automatic detection algorithms, but we found that they didn't fool our human analysts as easily. So Max and his engineers rewrote the software to take a hybrid approach. The computer would egg the most suspicious transactions on a well-designed user interface, and human operators would make the null judgment as to their legitimacy. Thanks to this hybrid system, we named it Igor, after the Russian fraudster who bragged that we'd never be able to stop him. We turned our RST quarterly prod in the RST quarter of 2002, as opposed to a quarterly loss of $29.3 million 1 year before. The FBI asked us if we'd let them use Igor to help detect financial crime. And Max was able to boast, grandiosely but truthfully, that he was the Sherlock Holmes of the Internet underground. This kind of man-machine symbiosis enabled PayPal to stay in business, which in turn enabled hundreds of thousands of small businesses to accept the payments they needed to thrive on the Internet. None of it would have been possible without the man-machine solution, even though most people would never see it or even hear about it. I continued to think about this after we sold PayPal in 2002. If humans and computers together could achieve dramatically better results than either could attain alone, what other valuable businesses could be built on this core principle? The next year, I pitched Alex Karp, an old Stanford classmate, and Stephen Cohen, a software engineer, on a new startup idea. We would use the human-computer hybrid approach from PayPal's security system to identify terrorist networks and financial fraud. We already knew the FBI was interested, and in 2004 we founded Palantir, a software company that helps people extract insight from divergent sources of information. The company is on track to book sales of $1 billion in 2014, and Forbes has called Palantir's software the killer app for its rumored role in helping the government locate Osama bin Laden. We have no details to share from that operation, but we can say that neither human intelligence by itself nor computers alone will be able to make us safe. America's two biggest spy agencies take opposite approaches. The Central Intelligence Agency is run by spies who privilege humans. The National Security Agency is run by generals who prioritize computers. CIA analysts have to wade through so much noise that it's very difficult to identify the most serious threats. NSA computers can process huge quantities of data, but machines alone cannot authoritatively determine whether someone is plotting a terrorist act. Palantir aims to transcend these opposing biases. Its software analyzes the data the government feeds it, phone records of radical clerics in Yemen or bank accounts linked to terror cell activity, for instance, and AGS suspicious activities for a trained analyst to review. In addition to helping ND terrorists, analysts using Palantir's software have been able to predict where insurgents plant IEDs in Afghanistan, prosecute high-profile insider trading cases, take down the largest child pornography ring in the world, support the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in ending foodborne disease outbreaks, and save both commercial banks and the government hundreds of millions of dollars annually through advanced fraud detection. Advanced software made this possible, but even more important were the human analysts, prosecutors, scientists, and financial professionals without whose active engagement the software would have been useless. Think of what professionals do in their jobs today. Lawyers must be able to articulate solutions to thorny problems in several different ways. The pitch changes depending on whether you're talking to a client, opposing counsel, or a judge. Doctors need to marry clinical understanding with an ability to communicate it to non-expert patients. And good teachers aren't just experts in their disciplines, they must also understand how to tailor their instruction to different individuals' interests and learning styles. Computers might be able to do some of these tasks, but they can't combine them effectively. Better technology in law, medicine, and education won't replace professionals, it will allow them to do even more. LinkedIn has done exactly this for recruiters. When LinkedIn was founded in 2003, they didn't poll recruiters to ND discrete pain points in need of relief. And they didn't try to write software that would replace recruiters outright. Recruiting is part detective work and part sales. You have to scrutinize applicants' history, assess their motives and compatibility, and persuade the most promising ones to join you. Effectively replacing all those functions with a computer would be impossible. Instead, LinkedIn set out to transform how recruiters did their jobs. Today, more than 97% of recruiters use LinkedIn and its powerful search and filtering functionality to source job candidates, and the network also creates value for the hundreds of millions of professionals who use it to manage their personal brands. If LinkedIn had tried to simply replace recruiters with technology, they wouldn't have a business today. The ideology of computer science. Why do so many people miss the power of complementarity? It starts in school. Software engineers tend to work on projects that replace human efforts because that's what they're trained to do. Academics make their reputations through specialized research. Their primary goal is to publish papers, and publication means respecting the limits of a particular discipline. For computer scientists, that means reducing human capabilities into specialized tasks that computers can be trained to conquer one by one. Just look at the trendiest fields in computer science today. The very term machine learning evokes imagery of replacement, and its boosters seem to believe that computers can be taught to perform almost any task, so long as we feed them enough training data. Any user of Netflix or Amazon has experienced the results of machine learning firsthand. Both companies use algorithms to recommend products based on your viewing and purchase history. Feed them more data and the recommendations get ever better. Google Translate works the same way, providing rough but serviceable translations into any of the 80 languages it supports, not because the software understands human language, but because it has extracted patterns through statistical analysis of a huge corpus of text. The other buzzword that epitomizes a bias towards substitution is big data. Today's companies have an insatiable appetite for data, mistakenly believing that more data always creates more value. But big data is usually dumb data. Computers can ND patterns that elude humans, but they don't know how to compare patterns from different sources or how to interpret complex behaviors. Actionable insights can only come from a human analyst, or the kind of generalized artificial intelligence that exists only in science fiction. We have let ourselves become enchanted by big data only because we exoticize technology. We're impressed with small feats accomplished by computers alone, but we ignore big achievements from complementarity because the human contribution makes them less uncanny. Watson, Deep Blue, and ever better machine learning algorithms are cool. But the most valuable companies in the future won't ask what problems can be solved with computers alone. Instead, they'll ask, how can computers help humans solve hard problems? Ever smarter computers, friend or foe? The future of computing is necessarily full of unknowns. It's become conventional to see ever smarter anthropomorphized robot intelligences like Siri and Watson as harbingers of things to come. Once computers can answer all our questions, perhaps they'll ask why they should remain subservient to us at all. The logical endpoint to this substitutionist thinking is called strong AI, computers that eclipse humans on every important dimension. Of course, the Luddites are terrified by the possibility. It even makes the futurists a little uneasy. It's not clear whether strong AI would save humanity or doom it. Technology is supposed to increase our mastery over nature and reduce the role of chance in our lives. Building smarter than human computers could actually bring chance back with a vengeance. Strong AI is like a cosmic lottery ticket. If we win, we get utopia. If we lose, Skynet substitutes us out of existence. But even if strong AI is a real possibility rather than an imponderable mystery, it won't happen anytime soon. Replacement by computers is a worry for the 22nd century. Indonite fears about the far future shouldn't stop us from making dinite plans today. Luddites claim that we shouldn't build the computers that might replace people someday. Crazed futurists argue that we should. These two positions are mutually exclusive, but they are not exhaustive. There is room in between for sane people to build a vastly better world in the decades ahead. As we nd new ways to use computers, they won't just get better at the kinds of things people already do, they'll help us to do what was previously unimaginable. 13. Seeing green tea. The start of the 21st century, everyone agreed that the next big thing was clean technology. It had to be. In Beijing, the smog had gotten so bad that people couldn't see from building to building. Even breathing was a health risk. Bangladesh, with its arsenic-laden water wells, was swearing what the New York Times called the biggest mass poisoning in history. In the US, hurricanes Ivan and Katrina were said to be harbingers of the coming devastation from global warming. Al Gore implored us to attack these problems with the urgency and resolve that has previously been seen only when nations mobilized for war. People got busy, entrepreneurs started thousands of clean tech companies, and investors poured more than $50 billion into them. So began the quest to cleanse the world. It didn't work. Instead of a healthier planet, we got a massive clean tech bubble. Solyndra is the most famous green ghost, but most clean tech companies met similarly disastrous ends. More than 40 solar manufacturers went out of business or led for bankruptcy in 2012 alone. The leading index of alternative energy companies shows the bubble's dramatic descent. Why did clean tech fail? Conservatives think they already know the answer. As soon as green energy became a priority for the government, it was poisoned. But there really were, and there still are, good reasons for making energy a priority. And the truth about clean tech is more complex and more important than government failure. Most clean tech companies crashed because they neglected one or more of the 7 questions that every business must answer. 1. The engineering question: can you create breakthrough technology instead of incremental improvements? 2. The timing question: is now the right time to start your particular business? 3. The monopoly question: are you starting with a big share of a small market? 4. The people question: do you have the right team? 5. The distribution question: do you have a way to not just create but deliver your product? 6. The durability question: will your market position be defensible 10 and 20 years into the future? 7. The secret question: have you identified a unique opportunity that others don't see? We've discussed these elements before. Whatever your industry, any great business plan must address every one of them. If you don't have good answers to these questions, you'll run into lots of bad luck and your business will fail. If you nail all 7, you'll master fortune and succeed. Even getting VE or 6 correct might work. But the striking thing about the clean tech bubble was that people were starting companies with 0 good answers, and that meant hoping for a miracle. It's hard to know exactly why any particular clean tech company failed, since almost all of them made several serious mistakes. But since any one of those mistakes is enough to doom your company, it's worth reviewing clean tech's losing scorecard in more detail. The engineering question: a great technology company should have proprietary technology an order of magnitude better than its nearest substitute. But clean tech companies rarely produced 2x, let alone 10x, improvements. Sometimes their errings were actually worse than the products they sought to replace. Solyndra developed novel, cylindrical solar cells, but to a RST approximation, cylindrical cells are only 1/pi as efficient as at ones. They simply don't receive as much direct sunlight. The company tried to correct for this deficiency by using mirrors to reflect more sunlight to hit the bottoms of the panels, but it's hard to recover from a radically inferior starting point. Companies must strive for 10x better because merely incremental improvements often end up meaning no improvement at all for the end user. Suppose you develop a new wind turbine that's 20% more efficient than any existing technology when you test it in the laboratory. That sounds good at RST, but the lab result won't begin to compensate for the expenses and risks faced by any new product in the real world. And even if your system really is 20% better on net for the customer who buys it, people are so used to exaggerated claims that you'll be met with skepticism when you try to sell it. Only when your product is 10x better can you offer the customer transparent superiority. The timing question: clean tech entrepreneurs worked hard to convince themselves that their appointed hour had arrived. When he announced his new company in 2008, SpectraWatt CEO Andrew Wilson stated that the solar industry is akin to where the microprocessor industry was in the late 1970s. There is a lot to be girded out and improved. The second part was right, but the microprocessor analogy was way off. Ever since the RST microprocessor was built in 1970, computing advanced not just rapidly but exponentially. Look at Intel's early product release history. The RST silicon solar cell, by contrast, was created by Bell Labs in 1954, more than a half-century before Wilson's press release. Photovoltaic efficiency improved in the intervening decades, but slowly and linearly. Bell's RST solar cell had about 6% efficiency. Neither today's crystalline silicon cells nor modern thin LM cells have exceeded 25% efficiency in the ELD. There were few engineering developments in the mid-2000s to suggest impending lifto. Entering a slow-moving market can be a good strategy, but only if you have a definite and realistic plan to take it over. The failed clean tech companies had none. The monopoly question: in 2006, billionaire technology investor John Doerr announced that green is the new red, white and blue. He could have stopped at red. As Doerr himself said, internet-sized markets are in the billions of dollars, the energy markets are in the trillions. What he didn't say is that huge, trillion-dollar markets mean ruthless, bloody competition. Others echoed Doerr over and over. In the 2000s, I listened to dozens of clean tech entrepreneurs begin fantastically rosy PowerPoint presentations with all too true tales of trillion-dollar markets as if that were a good thing. Clean tech executives emphasized the bounty of an energy market big enough for all comers, but each one typically believed that his own company had an edge. In 2006, Dave Pierce, CEO of solar manufacturer MyASol, admitted to a congressional panel that his company was just one of several very strong startups working on one particular kind of thin LM solar cell development. Minutes later, Pierce predicted that MyASol would become the largest producer of thin LM solar cells in the world within a year's time. That didn't happen, but it might not have helped them anyway. Thin LM is just one of more than a dozen kinds of solar cells. Customers won't care about any particular technology unless it solves a particular problem in a superior way. And if you can't monopolize a unique solution for a small market, you'll be stuck with vicious competition. That's what happened to MyASol, which was acquired in 2013 for hundreds of millions of dollars less than its investors had put into the company. Exaggerating your own uniqueness is an easy way to botch the monopoly question. Suppose you're running a solar company that's successfully installed hundreds of solar panel systems with a combined power generation capacity of 100 megawatts. Since total US solar energy production capacity is 950 megawatts, you own 10.53% of the market. Congratulations, you tell yourself, you're a player. And what if the appropriate measure isn't global solar, but rather renewable energy in general? Annual production capacity from renewables is 420 gigawatts globally, you just shrank to 0.02% of the market. And compared to the total global power generation capacity of 15,000 gigawatts, your 100 megawatts is just a drop in the ocean. Clean tech entrepreneurs thinking about markets was hopelessly confused. They would rhetorically shrink their market in order to seem differentiated, only to turn around and ask to be valued based on huge, supposedly lucrative markets. But you can't dominate a sub-market if it's fictional, and huge markets are highly competitive, not highly attainable. Most clean tech founders would have been better opening a new British restaurant in downtown Palo Alto. The people question energy problems are engineering problems, so you would expect to ND nerds running clean tech companies. You'd be wrong, the ones that failed were run by shockingly non-technical teams. These salesman executives were good at raising capital and securing government subsidies, but they were less good at building products that customers wanted to buy. At Founders Fund, we saw this coming. The most obvious clue was sartorial. Clean tech executives were running around wearing suits and ties. This was a huge red egg, because real technologists wear t-shirts and jeans. So we instituted a blanket rule: pass on any company whose founders dressed up for pitch meetings. Maybe we still would have avoided these bad investments if we had taken the time to evaluate each company's technology in detail. But the team insight never invest in a tech CEO that wears a suit got us to the truth a lot faster. The best sales is hidden. There's nothing wrong with a CEO who can sell, but if he actually looks like a salesman, he's probably bad at sales and worse at tech. Solyndra CEO Brian Harrison, Tesla Motors CEO Elon Musk. The distribution question: clean tech companies actively courted government and investors, but they often forgot about customers. They learned the hard way that the world is not a laboratory. Selling and delivering a product is at least as important as the product itself. Just ask Israeli electric vehicle startup Better Place, which from 2007 to 2012 raised and spent more than $800 million to build swappable battery packs and charging stations for electric cars. The company sought to create a green alternative that would lessen our dependence on highly polluting transportation technologies. And it did just that, at least by 1,000 cars, the number it sold bore Ling for bankruptcy. Even selling that many was an achievement, because each of those cars was very hard for customers to buy. For starters, it was never clear what you were actually buying. Better Place bought sedans from Renault and rented them with electric batteries and electric motors. So, were you buying an electric Renault, or were you buying a Better Place? In any case, if you decided to buy one, you had to jump through a series of hoops. First, you needed to seek approval from Better Place. To get that, you had to prove that you lived close enough to a Better Place battery swapping station and promise to follow predictable routes. If you passed that test, you had to sign up for a fueling subscription in order to recharge your car. Only then could you get started learning the new behavior of stopping to swap out battery packs on the road. Better Place thought its technology spoke for itself, so they didn't bother to market it clearly. Reacting on the company's failure, one frustrated customer asked, why wasn't there a billboard in Tel Aviv showing a picture of a Toyota Prius for 160,000 shekels and a picture of this car, for 160,000 plus fuel for 4 years? He still bought one of the cars, but unlike most people, he was a hobbyist who would do anything to keep driving it. Unfortunately, he can't, as the Better Place board of directors stated upon selling the company's assets for a meager $12 million in 2013, the technical challenges we overcame successfully, but the other obstacles we were not able to overcome. The durability question: every entrepreneur should plan to be the last mover in her particular market. That starts with asking yourself, what will the world look like 10 and 20 years from now, and how will my business tee in? Few clean tech companies had a good answer. As a result, all their obituaries resemble each other. A few months before it led for bankruptcy in 2011, Evergreen Solar explained its decision to close one of its U.S. factories. Solar manufacturers in China have received considerable government and financial support. Although our production costs are now below originally planned levels and lower than most Western manufacturers, they are still much higher than those of our low-cost competitors in China. But it wasn't until 2012 that the Blame China chorus really exploded. Discussing its bankruptcy, U.S. Department of Energy, backed Abound Solar blamed aggressive pricing actions from Chinese solar panel companies that made it very difficult for an early-stage startup company to scale in current market conditions. When solar panel maker Energy Conversion Devices failed in February 2012, it went beyond blaming China in a press release and led a $950 million lawsuit against 3 prominent Chinese solar manufacturers, the same companies that Solindra's trustees in bankruptcy sued later that year on the grounds of attempted monopolization, conspiracy, and predatory pricing. But was competition from Chinese manufacturers really impossible to predict? Clean tech entrepreneurs would have done well to rephrase the durability question and ask, what will stop China from wiping out my business? Without an answer, the result shouldn't have come as a surprise. Beyond the failure to anticipate competition in manufacturing the same green products, clean tech embraced misguided assumptions about the energy market as a whole. An industry premised on the supposed twilight of fossil fuels was blindsided by the rise of fracking. In 2000, just 1.7% of America's natural gas came from fracked shale. 5 years later, that GER had climbed to 4.1%. Nevertheless, nobody in cleantech took this trend seriously. Renewables were the only way forward. Fossil fuels couldn't possibly get cheaper or cleaner in the future. But they did. By 2013, shale gas accounted for 34% of America's natural gas, and gas prices had fallen more than 70% since 2008, devastating most renewable energy business models. Fracking may not be a durable energy solution, either, but it was enough to doom clean tech companies that didn't see it coming. The secret question: every clean tech company justified itself with conventional truths about the need for a cleaner world. They deluded themselves into believing that an overwhelming social need for alternative energy solutions implied an overwhelming business opportunity for clean tech companies of all kinds. Consider how conventional it had become by 2006 to be bullish on solar. That year, President George W. Bush heralded a future of solar roofs that will enable the American family to be able to generate their own electricity. Investor and cleantech executive Bill Gross declared that the potential for solar is enormous. Suvi Sharma, then CEO of solar manufacturer Solaria, admitted that while there is a gold rush feeling to solar, there's also real gold here, or, in our case, sunshine. But rushing to embrace the convention sent scores of solar panel companies, Qcells, Evergreen Solar, SpectraWatt, and even Gross's own energy innovations, to name just a few, from promising beginnings to bankruptcy court very quickly. Each of the casualties had described their bright futures using broad conventions on which everybody agreed. Great companies have secrets, specific reasons for success that other people don't see. The myth of social entrepreneurship: cleantech entrepreneurs aimed for more than just success as most businesses deem it. The cleantech bubble was the biggest phenomenon and the biggest op in the history of social entrepreneurship. This philanthropic approach to business starts with the idea that corporations and nonprofits have until now been polar opposites. Corporations have great power, but they're shackled to the profit motive. Nonprofits pursue the public interest, but they're weak players in the wider economy. Social entrepreneurs aim to combine the best of both worlds and do well by doing good. Usually they end up doing neither. The ambiguity between social and financial goals doesn't help. But the ambiguity in the word social is even more of a problem. If something is socially good, is it good for society, or merely seen as good by society? Whatever is good enough to receive applause from all audiences can only be conventional, like the general idea of green energy. Progress isn't held back by some difference between corporate greed and nonprofit goodness. Instead, we're held back by the sameness of both. Just as corporations tend to copy each other, nonprofits all tend to push the same priorities. Cleantech shows the result: hundreds of undifferentiated products, all in the name of one overbroad goal. Doing something different is what's truly good for society, and it's also what allows a business to profit by monopolizing a new market. The best projects are likely to be overlooked, not trumpeted by a crowd. The best problems to work on are often the ones nobody else even tries to solve. Tesla, 7 for 7 Tesla is one of the few clean tech companies started last decade to be thriving today. They rode the social buzz of clean tech better than anyone, but they got the 7 questions right, so their success is instructive. Technology. Tesla's technology is so good that other car companies rely on it. Daimler uses Tesla's battery packs, Mercedes-Benz uses a Tesla powertrain, Toyota uses a Tesla motor. General Motors has even created a task force to track Tesla's next moves. But Tesla's greatest technological achievement isn't any single part or component, but rather its ability to integrate many components into one superior product. The Tesla Model S sedan, elegantly designed from end to end, is more than the sum of its parts. Consumer Reports rated it higher than any other car ever reviewed, and both Motor Trend and Automobile magazines named it their 2013 Car of the Year. Timing. In 2009, it was easy to think that the government would continue to support clean tech, green jobs were a political priority, federal funds were already earmarked, and Congress even seemed likely to pass cap-and-trade legislation. But where others saw generous subsidies that could go indefinitely, Tesla CEO Elon Musk rightly saw a one-time-only opportunity. In January 2010, about a year and a half before Solyndra imploded under the Obama administration and politicized the subsidy question, Tesla secured a $465 million loan from the U.S. Department of Energy. A $500 million subsidy was unthinkable in the mid-2000s. It's unthinkable today. There was only one moment where that was possible, and Tesla played it perfectly. Monopoly. Tesla started with a tiny sub-market that it could dominate, the market for high-end electric sports cars. Since the RST Roadster rolled off the production line in 2008, Teslas sold only about 3,000 of them, but at $109,000 apiece that's not trivial. Starting small allowed Tesla to undertake the necessary R&D to build the slightly less expensive Model S, and now Tesla owns the luxury electric sedan market, too. They sold more than 20,000 sedans in 2013, and now Tesla is in prime position to expand to broader markets in the future. Team. Tesla's CEO is the consummate engineer and salesman, so it's not surprising that he's assembled a team that's very good at both. Elon describes his style this way: if you're at Tesla, you're choosing to be at the equivalent of special forces. There's the regular army, and that's any, but if you are working at Tesla, you're choosing to step up your game. Distribution. Most companies underestimate distribution, but Tesla took it so seriously that it decided to own the entire distribution chain. Other car companies are beholden to independent dealerships. Ford and Hyundai make cars, but they rely on other people to sell them. Tesla sells and services its vehicles in its own stores. The upfront costs of Tesla's approach are much higher than traditional dealership distribution, but it affords control over the customer experience, strengthens Tesla's brand, and saves the company money in the long run. Durability. Tesla has a head start, and it's moving faster than anyone else, and that combination means its lead is set to widen in the years ahead. A coveted brand is the clearest sign of Tesla's breakthrough. A car is one of the biggest purchasing decisions that people ever make, and consumers' trust in that category is hard to win. And unlike every other car company, at Tesla the founder is still in charge, so it's not going to ease anytime soon. Secrets. Tesla knew that fashion drove interest in clean tech. Rich people especially wanted to appear green, even if it meant driving a boxy Prius or clunky Honda Insight. Those cars only made drivers look cool by association with the famous eco-conscious movie stars, who owned them as well. So Tesla decided to build cars that made drivers look cool. Leonardo DiCaprio even ditched his Prius for an expensive-looking, Tesla Roadster. While generic clean tech companies struggled to differentiate themselves, Tesla built a unique brand around the secret that clean tech was even more of a social phenomenon than an environmental imperative. Energy 2.0. Tesla's success proves that there was nothing inherently wrong with clean tech. The biggest idea behind it is right: the world really will need new sources of energy. Energy is the master resource, it's how we feed ourselves, build shelter, and make everything we need to live comfortably. Most of the world dreams of living as comfortably as Americans do today, and globalization will cause increasingly severe energy challenges unless we build new technology. There simply aren't enough resources in the world to replicate old approaches or redistribute our way to prosperity. Clean tech gave people a way to be optimistic about the future of energy. But when inordinately optimistic investors betting on the general idea of green energy funded clean tech companies that lacked specific business plans, the result was a bubble. Plot the valuation of alternative energy RMS in the 2000s alongside the Nasdaq's rise and fall a decade before, and you see the same shape. The 1990s had one big idea: the internet is going to be big. But too many internet companies had exactly that same idea and no others. An entrepreneur can't benefit from macro-scale insight unless his own plans begin at the micro-scale. Clean tech companies faced the same problem. No matter how much the world needs energy, only a RM that offers a superior solution for a specific energy problem can make money. No sector will ever be so important that merely participating in it will be enough to build a great company. The tech bubble was far bigger than clean tech and the crash even more painful. But the dream of the 90s turned out to be right. Skeptics who doubted that the internet would fundamentally change publishing or retail sales or everyday social life looked prescient in 2001, but they seem comically foolish today. Could successful energy startups be founded after the clean tech crash just as Web 2.0 startups successfully launched amid the debris of the dot-coms? The macro need for energy solutions is still real. But a valuable business must start by ending a niche and dominating a small market. Facebook started as a service for just one university campus before it spread to other schools and then the entire world. Finding small markets for energy solutions will be tricky. You could aim to replace diesel as a power source for remote islands, or maybe build modular reactors for quick deployment at military installations in hostile territories. Paradoxically, the challenge for the entrepreneurs who will create Energy 2.0 is to think small. 14. Oh, the founder's paradox. The 6 people who started PayPal, 4 had built bombs in high school. 5 were just 23 years old or younger. 4 of us had been born outside the United States. 3 had escaped here from communist countries, Yu Pan from China, Luke Nozek from Poland, and Max Levchin from Soviet Ukraine. Building bombs was not what kids normally did in those countries at that time. The 6 of us could have been seen as eccentric. My first ever conversation with Luke was about how he'd just signed up for cryonics, to be frozen upon death in hope of medical resurrection. Max claimed to be without a country and proud of it. His family was put into diplomatic limbo when the USSR collapsed while they were escaping to the US. Russ Simmons had escaped from a trailer park to the top math and science magnet school in Illinois. Only Ken Howery the stereotype of a privileged American childhood. He was PayPal's sole Eagle Scout. But Kenny's peers thought he was crazy to join the rest of us and make just 1/3 of the salary he had been earned by a big bank. So even he wasn't entirely normal. The PayPal team in 1999, are all founders unusual people? Or do we just tend to remember and exaggerate whatever is most unusual about them? More important, which personal traits actually matter in a founder? This chapter is about why it's more powerful but at the same time more dangerous for a company to be led by a distinctive individual instead of an interchangeable manager. The difference engine. Some people are strong, some are weak, some are geniuses, some are dullards, but most people are in the middle. Plot where everyone falls and you'll see a bell curve. Since so many founders seem to have extreme traits, you might guess that a plot showing only founders' traits would have fatter tails with more people at either end. But that doesn't capture the strangest thing about founders. Normally we expect opposite traits to be mutually exclusive. A normal person can't be both rich and poor at the same time, for instance. But it happens all the time to founders. Startup CEOs can be cash poor but millionaires on paper. They may oscillate between sullen jerkiness and appealing charisma. Almost all successful entrepreneurs are simultaneously insiders and outsiders. And when they do succeed, they attract both fame and infamy. When you plot them out, founders' traits appear to follow an inverse normal distribution. Where does this strange and extreme combination of traits come from? They could be present from birth, nature, or acquired from an individual's environment, nurture. But perhaps founders aren't really as extreme as they appear. Might they strategically exaggerate certain qualities? Or is it possible that everyone else exaggerates them? All of these eeks can be present at the same time, and whenever present they powerfully reinforce each other. The cycle usually starts with unusual people and ends with them acting and seeming even more unusual. As an example, take Sir Richard Branson, the billionaire founder of the Virgin Group. He could be described as a natural entrepreneur. Branson started his RST business at age 16, and at just 22 he founded Virgin Records. But other aspects of his renown, the trademark lion's mane hairstyle, for example, are less natural. One suspects he wasn't born with that exact look. As Branson has cultivated his other extreme traits, is kiteboarding with naked supermodels a PR stunt? Just a guy having fun? Both. The media has eagerly enthroned him. Branson is the Virgin King, the undisputed king of PR, the king of branding, and the king of the desert and space. When Virgin Atlantic Airways began serving passengers drinks with ice cubes shaped like Branson's face, he became the Ice King. Is Branson just a normal businessman who happens to be lionized by the media with the help of a good PR team? Or is he himself a born branding genius rightly singled out by the journalists he is so good at manipulating? It's hard to tell, maybe he's both. Another example is Sean Parker, who started out with the ultimate outsider status, criminal. Sean was a careful hacker in high school. But his father decided that Sean was spending too much time on the computer for a 16-year-old, so one day he took away Sean's keyboard mid-hack. Sean couldn't log out, the FBI noticed. Soon federal agents were placing him under arrest. Sean got easy since he was a minor. If anything, the episode emboldened him. 3 years later, he co-founded Napster. The peer-to-peer sharing service amassed 10 million users in its RST year, making it one of the fastest-growing businesses of all time. But the record companies sued and a federal judge ordered it shut down 20 months after opening. After a whirlwind period at the center, Sean was back to being an outsider again. Then came Facebook. Sean met Mark Zuckerberg in 2004, helped negotiate Facebook's RST funding, and became the company's founding president. He had to step down in 2005 amid allegations of drug use, but this only enhanced his notoriety. Ever since Justin Timberlake portrayed him in The Social Network, Sean has been perceived as one of the coolest people in America. JT is still more famous, but when he visits Silicon Valley, people ask if he's Sean Parker. The most famous people in the world are founders, too. Instead of a company, every celebrity founds and cultivates a personal brand. Lady Gaga, for example, became one of the most influential living people. But is she even a real person? Her real name isn't a secret, but almost no one knows or cares what it is. She wears costumes so bizarre as to put any other wearer at risk of an involuntary psychiatric hold. Gaga would have you believe that she was born this way, the title of both her second album and its lead track. But no one is born looking like a zombie with horns coming out of her head. Gaga must therefore be a self-manufactured myth. Then again, what kind of person would do this to herself? Certainly nobody normal. So perhaps Gaga really was born that way. Where kings come from, extreme founders are not new in human heirs. Classical mythology is full of them. Oedipus is the paradigmatic insider/outsider. He was abandoned as an infant and ended up in a foreign land, but he was a brilliant king and smart enough to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. Romulus and Remus were born of royal blood and abandoned as orphans. When they discovered their pedigree, they decided to found a city. But they couldn't agree on where to put it. When Remus crossed the boundary that Romulus had decided was the edge of Rome, Romulus killed him, declaring, "So perish everyone that shall hereafter leap over my wall." Lawmaker and lawbreaker, criminal outlaw and king who deemed Rome, Romulus was a self-contradictory insider/outsider. Normal people aren't like Oedipus or Romulus. Whatever those individuals were actually like in life, the mythologized versions of them remember only the extremes. But why was it so important for archaic cultures to remember extraordinary people? The famous and infamous have always served as vessels for public sentiment. They're praised amid prosperity and blamed for misfortune. Primitive societies faced one fundamental problem above all: they would be torn apart by conflict if they didn't have a way to stop it. So whenever plagues, disasters, or violent rivalries threatened the peace, it was beneficial for the society to place the entire blame on a single person, someone everybody could agree on, a scapegoat. Who makes an effective scapegoat? Like founders, scapegoats are extreme and contradictory figures. On the one hand, a scapegoat is necessarily weak, he is powerless to stop his own victimization. On the other hand, as the one who can defuse conflict by taking the blame, he is the most powerful member of the community. Before execution, scapegoats were often worshipped like deities. The Aztecs considered their victims to be earthly forms of the gods to whom they were sacrificed. You would be dressed in any clothes and feast royally until your brief reign ended and they cut your heart out. These are the roots of monarchy. Every king was a living god, and every god a murdered king. Perhaps every modern king is just a scapegoat who has managed to delay his own execution. American royalty celebrities are supposedly American royalty. We even grant titles to our favorite performers. Elvis Presley was the king of rock. Michael Jackson was the king of pop. Britney Spears was the pop princess. Until they weren't. Elvis self-destructed in the 70s and died alone, overweight, sitting on his toilet. Today, his impersonators are fat and sketchy, not lean and cool. Michael Jackson went from beloved child star to an erratic, physically repulsive, drug-addicted shell of his former self. The world reveled in the details of his trials. Britney's story is the most dramatic of all. We created her from nothing, elevating her to superstardom as a teenager. But then everything fell off the tracks. Witness the shaved head, the over and under eating scandals, and the highly publicized court case to take away her children. Was she always a little bit crazy? Did the publicity just get to her? Or did she do it all to get more? For some fallen stars, death brings resurrection. So many popular musicians have died at age 27: Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and Kurt Cobain, for example, that this set has become immortalized as the 27 Club. Before she joined the club in 2011, Amy Winehouse sang, "They tried to make me go to rehab, but I said, no, no, no." Maybe rehab seemed so unattractive because it blocked the path to immortality. Perhaps the only way to be a rock god forever is to die an early death. We alternately worship and despise technology founders just as we do celebrities. Howard Hughes's arc from fame to pity is the most dramatic of any 20th century tech founder. He was born wealthy, but he was always more interested in engineering than luxury. He built Houston's RST radio transmitter at the age of 11. The year after that he built the city's RST motorcycle. By age 30 he'd made 9 commercially successful movies at a time when Hollywood was on the technological frontier. But Hughes was even more famous for his parallel career in aviation. He designed planes, produced them, and piloted them himself. Hughes set world records for top airspeed, fastest transcontinental flight, and fastest flight around the world. Hughes was obsessed with being higher than everyone else. He liked to remind people that he was a mere mortal, not a Greek god, something that mortals say only when they want to invite comparisons to gods. Hughes was a man to whom you cannot apply the same standards as you can to you and me, his lawyer once argued in federal court. Hughes paid the lawyer to say that, but according to the New York Times there was no dispute on this point from judge or jury. When Hughes was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 1939 for his achievements in aviation, he didn't even show up to claim it. Years later President Truman found it in the White House and mailed it to him. The beginning of Hughes's end came in 1946, when he suffered his third and worst plane crash. Had he died then, he would have been remembered forever as one of the most dashing and successful Americans of all time. But he survived barely. He became obsessive-compulsive, addicted to painkillers, and withdrew from the public to spend the last 30 years of his life in self-imposed solitary confinement. Hughes had always acted a little crazy, on the theory that fewer people would want to bother a crazy person. But when his crazy act turned into a crazy life, he became an object of pity as much as awe. More recently, Bill Gates has shown how highly visible success can attract highly focused attacks. Gates embodied the founder archetype. He was simultaneously an awkward and nerdy college dropout outsider and the world's wealthiest insider. Did he choose his geeky eyeglasses strategically, to build up a distinctive persona? Or, in his incurable nerdiness, did his geek glasses choose him? It's hard to know. But his dominance was undeniable. Microsoft's Windows claimed a 90% share of the market for operating systems in 2000. That year Peter Jennings could plausibly ask, who is more important in the world today, Bill Clinton or Bill Gates? I don't know. It's a good question. The US Department of Justice didn't limit itself to rhetorical questions. They opened an investigation and sued Microsoft for anti-competitive conduct. In June 2000 a court ordered that Microsoft be broken apart. Gates had stepped down as CEO of Microsoft 6 months earlier, having been forced to spend most of his time responding to legal threats instead of building new technology. A court of appeals later overturned the breakup order, and Microsoft reached a settlement with the government in 2001. But by then Gates's enemies had already deprived his company of the full engagement of its founder, and Microsoft entered an era of relative stagnation. Today Gates is better known as a philanthropist than a technologist. The return of the king. Just as the legal attack on Microsoft was ending Bill Gates's dominance, Steve Jobs' return to Apple demonstrated the irreplaceable value of a company's founder. In some ways, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were opposites. Jobs was an artist, preferred closed systems, and spent his time thinking about great products above all else. Gates was a businessman, kept his products open, and wanted to run the world. But both were insiders/outsiders, and both pushed the companies they started to achievements that nobody else would have been able to match. A college dropout who walked around barefoot and refused to shower, Jobs was also the insider of his own personality cult. He could act charismatic or crazy, perhaps according to his mood or perhaps according to his calculations. It's hard to believe that such weird practices as Apple-only diets weren't part of a larger strategy. But all this eccentricity backfired on him in 1985. Apple's board actively kicked Jobs out of his own company when he clashed with the professional CEO brought in to provide adult supervision. Jobs' return to Apple 12 years later shows how the most important task in business, the creation of new value, cannot be reduced to a formula and applied by professionals. When he was hired as interim CEO of Apple in 1997, the impeccably credentialed executives who preceded him had steered the company nearly to bankruptcy. That year Michael Dell famously said of Apple, "What would I do? I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders." Instead, Jobs introduced the iPod, 2001, the iPhone, 2007, and the iPad, 2010, before he had to resign in 2011 because of poor health. By the following year Apple was the single most valuable company in the world. Apple's value crucially depended on the singular vision of a particular person. This hints at the strange way in which the companies that create new technology often resemble feudal monarchies rather than organizations that are supposedly more modern. A unique founder can make authoritative decisions, inspire strong personal loyalty, and plan ahead for decades. Paradoxically, impersonal bureaucracies stood by trained professionals can last longer than any lifetime, but they usually act with short time horizons. The lesson for business is that we need founders. If anything, we should be more tolerant of founders who seem strange or extreme. We need unusual individuals to lead companies beyond mere incrementalism. The lesson for founders is that individual prominence and adulation can never be enjoyed except on the condition that it may be exchanged for individual notoriety and demonization at any moment, so be careful. Above all, don't overestimate your own power as an individual. Founders are important not because they are the only ones whose work has value, but rather because a great founder can bring out the best work from everybody at his company. That we need individual founders in all their peculiarity does not mean that we are called to worship Ayn Randian prime movers who claim to be independent of everybody around them. In this respect, Rand was a merely half-great writer. Her villains were real, but her heroes were fake. There is no Galt's Gulch. There is no secession from society. To believe yourself invested with divine self-sufficiency is not the mark of a strong individual, but of a person who has mistaken the crowd's worship or jeering for the truth. The single greatest danger for a founder is to become so certain of his own myth that he loses his mind. But an equally insidious danger for every business is to lose all sense of myth and mistake disenchantment for wisdom. Conclusion: stagnation or singularity. Even the most far-sighted founders cannot plan beyond the next 20 to 30 years, is there anything to say about the very distant future? We don't know anything specific, but we can make out the broad contours. Philosopher Nick Bostrom describes 4 possible patterns for the future of humanity. The ancients saw all of history as a never-ending alternation between prosperity and ruin. Only recently have people dared to hope that we might permanently escape misfortune, and it's still possible to wonder whether the stability we take for granted will last. However, we usually suppress our doubts. Conventional wisdom seems to assume instead that the whole world will converge toward a plateau of development similar to the life of the richest countries today. In this scenario, the future will look a lot like the present. Given the interconnected geography of the contemporary world and the unprecedented destructive power of modern weaponry, it's hard not to ask whether a large-scale social disaster could be contained were it to occur. This is what fuels our fears of the third possible scenario, a collapse so devastating that we won't survive it. The last of the 4 possibilities is the hardest one to imagine, accelerating takeoff toward a much better future. The end result of such a breakthrough could take a number of forms, but any one of them would be so different from the present as to defy description. Which of the 4 will it be? Recurrent collapse seems unlikely. The knowledge underlying civilization is so widespread today that complete annihilation would be more probable than a long period of darkness followed by recovery. However, in case of extinction, there is no human future of any kind to consider. If we deem the future as a time that looks different from the present, then most people aren't expecting any future at all. Instead, they expect coming decades to bring more globalization, convergence, and sameness. In this scenario, poorer countries will catch up to richer countries, and the world as a whole will reach an economic plateau. But even if a truly globalized plateau were possible, could it last? In the best case, economic competition would be more intense than ever before for every single person and RM on the planet. However, when you add competition to consume scarce resources, it's hard to see how a global plateau could last indefinitely. Without new technology to relieve competitive pressures, stagnation is likely to erupt into conflict. In case of conflict on a global scale, stagnation collapses into extinction. That leaves the 4th scenario, in which we create new technology to make a much better future. The most dramatic version of this outcome is called the singularity, an attempt to name the imagined result of new technologies so powerful as to transcend the current limits of our understanding. Ray Kurzweil, the best-known singularitarian, starts from Moore's law and traces exponential growth trends in dozens of fields, confidently projecting a future of superhuman artificial intelligence. According to Kurzweil, the singularity is near, it's inevitable, and all we have to do is prepare ourselves to accept it. But no matter how many trends can be traced, the future won't happen on its own. What the singularity would look like matters less than the stark choice we face today between the 2 most likely scenarios, nothing or something. It's up to us. We cannot take for granted that the future will be better, and that means we need to work to create it today. Whether we achieve the singularity on a cosmic scale is perhaps less important than whether we seize the unique opportunities we have to do new things in our own working lives. Everything important to us, the universe, the planet, the country, your company, your life, and this very moment is singular. Our task today is to end singular ways to create the new things that will make the future not just different, but better, to go from 0 to 1. The essential RST step is to think for yourself. Only by seeing our world anew, as fresh and strange as it was to the ancients who saw it RST, can we both recreate it and preserve it for the future. About the authors: Peter Thiel is an entrepreneur and investor. He started PayPal in 1998, led it as CEO, and took it public in 2002, denting a new era of fast and secure online commerce. In 2004 he made the RST outside investment in Facebook, where he serves as a director. The same year he launched Palantir Technologies, a software company that harnesses computers to empower human analysts in fields like national security and global finance. He has provided early funding for LinkedIn, Yelp, and dozens of successful technology startups. many run by former colleagues who have been dubbed the PayPal Ma. He is a partner at Founders Fund, a Silicon Valley venture capital arm that has funded companies like SpaceX and Airbnb. He started the Thiel Fellowship, which ignited a national debate by encouraging young people to put learning before schooling, and he leads the Thiel Foundation, which works to advance technological progress and long-term thinking about the future. Blake Masters was a student at Stanford Law School in 2012 when his detailed notes on Peter's class Computer Science 183, Startup became an internet sensation. He went on to co-found Judicata, a legal research technology startup.